South Park premiered in 1997 to unexpected, overwhelming success. With an initial pickup of only 6 episodes, in anticipation of it not catching on, this success was possibly most surprising to Comedy Central, who now scrambled to capitalize on this newfound popularity. They immediately ordered an additional 7 episodes for Season 1, began using South Park as a poster child for their network, a network which before had been struggling to compete with the big dogs of the industry. Now they had their own identity as this edgy, punk rock alternative to that lame-ass crap your boring, stupid parents watch. But most importantly, Comedy Central began handing out the South Park license everywhere. T-shirts, action figures, bobbleheads, chess sets. There was nothing they weren't willing to put the South Park logo on. This is because when it comes to animation, the cartoon isn't what's making the money. They're so expensive to produce that the advertising rates you charge for commercials in between shows typically isn't enough to cover the costs. In exchange, however, you're hopefully given a wide array of marketable characters you can slap on whatever you want, in order to make some actual revenue. The money's in the merchandising! That's my catchphrase. The Comedy Central were put in a lucky position because, 1. South Park was a hell of a lot cheaper to produce than the other 22-minute cartoons from the time, and 2. The characters were insanely marketable. Look at them! 4 foul-mouthed boys, each with their own simple yet distinct design and personality. The possibilities are limitless. You know, you look at the Simpsons merchandise from the time and there's always something a bit uncanny about the way they look. These characters were clearly not meant to be viewed in this dimension. South Park? Well, even if they look doofy, it works because, well, they look doofy in the show, too. South Park mania was running rampant in such a short amount of time, and one company who took notice of this was video game publisher Acclaim. If you watched my SpongeBob video game video, they're basically the THQ of this scenario. They had been publishing games for decades, putting out a dozen, sometimes 2 dozen every year. And while they weren't always the most well-received, there was a reason they stuck around for so long. And that's because if there was one thing they did know, it was how to pump them out, no matter the quality. Acclaim, despite getting a critical hit every now and then, quickly became known for their buggy, poorly designed, rushed releases. But how would they think they could get away with pumping out such poor products? I'll tell you how, because Bart freaking Simpson was on the cover. Long before South Park hit the airways, Acclaim had seen huge success with their Simpsons games, most of them revolving around this guy. Were any of them good? No. Believe me, I should know. That's a video that'll be coming soon, when I can be bothered to finish half of them. Anyways, Acclaim had the brilliant strategy of acquiring whatever popular new IP had just come out on TV or in theaters, and quickly scraping together whatever crap they could, knowing what would sell on brand recognition alone. And they saw dollar signs in their eyes after witnessing the meteoric rise of South Park on Comedy Central, and so they swooped up the video game license as soon as they could. And what would soon follow was a string of releases so rushed, so negatively received, that it convinced South Park creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker themselves to step in and put a stop to the whole ordeal, refusing to release another South Park game for 14 years. So join me as we head on down and take a look through every South Park game ever made, the good, the bad, and the cancelled. We got about 12 games to look at today, not all of them created equal, not all of them even released. But either way, let's get to it by starting with South Park's first ever video game, aptly titled South Park, was released just over a year after the show first premiered. The weird part, only for Nintendo 64.
I found on your grid. Hey, stupid, I'm over here.
Comedy Central South Park, the video game. From Acclaim.
That's right, the console most known for Mario and Banjo-Kazooie was now going to be home to a game that on the back of the box says Cartman's Big Fat what? Big Fat what? Coming out close to the end of the show's second season, it's no surprise it wound up being a huge hit, selling around 1 million copies and justifying a port to PlayStation 1 the next year. It's bizarre how much Nintendo wanted to promote this thing, perhaps to help their console not just appeal to freaking babies, after realizing that was a key factor in helping Sega get the edge over them during the last console generation. Get an N64, fellow teens. We've got cool games like South Park.
Zelda's great, Turok 2, South Park would be fine. How about Rogue Squadron? That game should be mine.
Make up for a lame Christmas. Get the hits you missed on N64.
This surprisingly worked. There's just one issue. Apparently the game is dog shit. See, there was a big belief around the time of South Park's second season that the show was starting to be on its way out. that it was a flash in the pan. It had its brief moment in the spotlight, and now it's time for it to fuck off. And this wasn't an unfounded opinion. If you look at the ratings for the show's second season, despite a huge start, over time, things were starting to dip. Of course, now we all know this was simply the show's audience leveling out, separating those who were only watching it because it was the talk of the town and those who were actually genuine fans. But at the time, Acclaim figured they needed to get this game out ASAP to capitalize on the show before it was too late. And so they gave their team 6 months to make it. Like, what? Again, nothing new for Acclaim. But this was no longer the days of 8 or 16-bit. It was 64. Nintendo 64. And so the team behind the game, Iguana Entertainment, only had one option: to make it a first-person shooter. See, they already had access to the Turok engine, which was used to make the FPS Turok 2, and given the time crunch, it was simply easier to use this existing one than waste time on something new, which kinda restricted the game to this genre. Now, I see a lot of folks make fun of this fact online. A South Park FPS? What were they smoking? No, really, what were they smoking? But I personally never bat an eye at this decision. It was an adult show. Shooters were a popular genre with that demographic. I mean, this sure made a lot more sense than a 3D collectathon or a puzzle game, I don't know. And it's not like the boys are running around with machine guns or anything. It's snowballs and Nerf guns. I think it works. Now, being born in 2002, I was a lot late to this game's release. But when I discovered South Park at the age of like 7 or 8, I wanted to consume as much of it as I could. I borrowed DVDs from my uncles, begged for the movie for my birthday, and would spend my evenings after school Googling as much info as I could. And that's when I learned there were South Park video games? It didn't matter what they were, when they released, when they came out, I had to play them. And so one year I begged my parents to get me 2 games for my birthday, and in retrospect I have to imagine how strange it was for their 10-year-old son to come to them in 2012 and ask for South Park on PlayStation 1 and Sonic 06. Happy birthday to me. I vividly remember that day, my dad getting the package in the mail, me putting it in my PlayStation 2 Slim, ignoring the notification that my PS2 memory card wouldn't work for a PS1 game, and being met with this. My dad walked in the room, looked at the TV and said, "This looks like shit. Why did you want this?" "No, it's cool, I swear, I like it." Seriously. I then played it for 10 minutes, got stuck, and turned it off. I can't believe it. Something South Park related could be bad? I was extremely disappointed, never touching the game ever again. Until today. So, is the game as bad as I remember? Was I just a stupid loser? Both answers can be yes. The story sees a strange comet pass over South Park, a comet which causes a series of spooky shit to happen on Earth.
All kind of crazy, spooky stuff is gonna happen.
Spooky like how?
Spooky like you better get your asses indoors, children.
Nobody really seems to be doing anything about this, however, and so it's up to Stan, Kyle, Eric, and Kenny to set out and defend the town. Pretty basic idea, but I think it works well enough. Very in line with the other sci-fi concepts the early seasons would frequently explore, and the game itself is filled with cutscenes showcasing the characters' progression, even if most of them follow the same structure. Characters arrive at a place, are informed of their objective, Cartman boasts about how awesome he is, other characters call him fat. That is how, like, 90% of the cutscenes here play out. It's definitely not written by Matt and Trey, but I can appreciate whoever did write it trying to capture the tone of the show, even if it does come off like a poor imitation. They did come in to voice all the characters, though. We ain't got no sound-alike shit going on here. Even Isaac Hayes is here to voice Chef. A fact they're so proud of, they had to put it on the back of the box. Oh dude, Isaac Hayes is in this game? Take my money! While it is nice hearing the boys talk during gameplay, it does get incredibly repetitive with them spotting the same 5 or 6 phrases ad nauseum. But as I'm gonna soon get into, repetitiveness is not an issue exclusive to the sound design. Okay, first of all, I gotta acknowledge the elephant in the room. That, of course, being these visuals. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that the world of South Park just cannot work in 3 dimensions, and while I don't even necessarily disagree with that statement, I do think there's a certain novelty in seeing such a simple, blocky show presented in a way it was never meant to be. For the most part, I think the town itself looks fine. A lot of the interiors are okay. Really, I think a lot of the complaints can be chalked up to the first level doing such a horrible job at selling you on this look. After you leave the town and venture off into the mountains, you find yourself surrounded by nothing but snow and dirt for like 30 minutes, and after a while your eyes just get fucking bored. This is as far as I ever got in this game as a kid because I just got so sick of looking at it. This first level felt endless, which is weird because it's by far the longest one out of the bunch. Such a backwards way of doing things. Aside from that, I think all the modes themselves look fine. It's that same thing I was talking about with the merchandise, where it can get away with being a tad scuffed or silly looking. And all the boys' models look nice, even if the textures on PS1 Cartman gives him a neckbeard. This is something so minor, but I always loved that since the game was in first person, you could see their arm in the corner and their coat has this realistic texture. Doesn't match the show, but I can't be the only one who likes the way this looks, right? What I don't like, something everybody rags on this game for, is the horrible draw distance. I mean, it is pitiful. It is near impossible to see anything going on in front of you unless it's within like 5 feet. It does get better as the game goes on with the more you're put in these enclosed spaces, but it is persistent and only adds to the blandness of that first level because everything is just fucking white. Thankfully, there's this little mini-map at the bottom corner that tells you what's around, even differentiating certain enemy types. Boy, I tell you, if this map wasn't there, this game would be borderline unplayable. And it already is borderline unplayable, so the idea of it being even worse is terrifying. Anyways, at the start of the game, you can select which of the 4 boys you want to play as. They're all the exact same, it really just comes down to personal preference, and who has the least annoying sound bites to listen to on loop. At the start of each level, you're tasked with collecting each of them, which adds them to this upper left corner. But I never knew what the point in this was. I always assumed this meant you could switch between them on the fly, and I was just too stupid to figure out how. But no! And they're usually standing right beside where you spawn, so I don't even know what the point of this was. All it does is take up valuable screen space. I guess you spend 3/4 of the game staring at their fucking hands, so it's there to remind you that this is indeed a South Park game. It follows a fairly linear structure. No matter what, your objective is usually just to reach the goal while mowing down whatever is in your way. It's really annoying though. Sometimes you're not required to kill everything to proceed, while other times it's mandatory to kill these bigger enemies they refer to as tanks. But you never really know when it's needed, and the tanks are usually going along their own path. So it's entirely possible to get to the very end of the stage, wonder where the hell you're meant to go next, go backwards through the entire thing again, finding whatever enemies you missed, again, while dealing with the horrendous draw distance, and then you have to go all the way back to the finish again, and now a door is opened. Yippee, there's an hour of your life you're never getting back. The only other level types are the odd time you're dropped back in South Park with a little map of the town in the corner, and you have to defeat all the bad guys before they destroy the place. Although there is never more than like 3 of them, so these never take more than a minute to complete. Sometimes there's only 2 or 1 and they're defeated in the exact same way they are in the regular stages. And in those cases, there can be like 10 or more in a level, so, you know, what the fuck? Anytime you're not locked onto a straight pathway, the game constantly has you wondering if you're doing the right thing. There's this moment where you find out the visitors have returned, and now you have to defeat 2 security guards to sneak onto their ship. But you defeat them, and they just respawn. What, did I kill them wrong? So you just roam around the map killing every enemy over and over again. They feel endless. You start to wonder if you read the pre-level instructions right. Was I meant to look for something? Like a switch or some shit? I don't know. But you don't want to quit in case you're left in the exact same position. And so you just sit there, killing enemy after enemy for like 10 minutes and then these 2 guys spawn. Oh, hello! Then you kill them and can now get the key to go on the ship. Oh. So I was just meant to stand there mindlessly killing them on repeat. Fun. I mean, this would be a little more justifiable, I guess, if it were some kind of gauntlet where you were constantly having to manage your health and weapons, lure some enemies away from others to make it easier on yourself. You know, if there were any semblance of challenge or strategy. But it takes forever to die in this game, and they are constantly handing out health. Some of which fills you back to 100 immediately. And so it results in this utterly mind-numbing experience, where you can just feel the developers desperately try to pad out the runtime. There are 5 levels present here, each focusing on a different threat to South Park. First is some pissed-off turkeys, next are fucked-up clones, after that it's aliens, then it's robots, and finally we have killer toys. Sounds like a lot of variety, right? No. For a majority of the game, there's really just 2 enemy types, the fodder and the tanks. That is it. Doesn't matter that this time it's a turkey and this time it's a clone, they are all reskins of the same base. It's only by the last level where you see them actually offer a bit of variety, with tanks that shoot at you, dolls that vomit in your face, cars that whack you in the shin, but then it just becomes annoying, because now you gotta deal with these tiny targets and realize just how awful it feels to aim. You can only look left and right with the D-pad, having to use the shoulder buttons to lift your head up and drop it down. And while you do get used to it, in this last level it is just a nightmare to deal with, especially with these fucking plane enemies. I hated it. There's one other type of bad guy, and that's the boss fight, which ranged from piss easy to what feels near impossible. Like the end of level 2, this blob presented no challenge whatsoever. I blinked and it was dead. But the level 1 fight was horrible. There's this giant mutant turkey headed towards the town, and it's up to you to stop it. But you can only damage it if you whack it in the ass. Sounds simple, right? No! Fucking, let me finish! See, if the boss manages to reach the town, it won't go in. Instead, it will start roaming around this tiny arena chasing you. It will always try to face wherever you're at, and so now, the real challenge isn't dodging attacks or aiming correctly. It's constantly circling the thing on repeat in the hopes of even getting the opportunity to attack it. Because of this, you have to make sure you beat it before it gets to the town, but it takes forever with your regular snowball, especially with it attacking you constantly and spawning more tanks. The only way to ensure you beat this boss is to have the right weapons in your arsenal to take care of it quickly. But it is a complete gamble what weapons you have when starting the fight. Throughout each stage, you can find various weapons scattered throughout the place, whether they be dodgeballs or Terrence and Phillip fart grenades, or car launchers, all of which do more damage than your snowball. But there is nothing to say you couldn't have used them all up on the hundreds of other enemies you're faced with, in the like 40 minutes of gameplay so far. How could you have anticipated a boss fight where that'd be mandatory? I didn't even think they could afford to make a boss. And so now you gotta play through the thing a dozen goddamn times, trying to map out the perfect route that allows you to gather as many weapons as you can find laying around, while still making sure you have enough time to defeat it before you're forced to kill yourself and start over. There is also no telling what weapon works best for which boss. It's simply a case of hoping you already have one in your inventory. And so your best bet is to tediously spam each level only using the basic ass snowball, hoping something you've gathered will come in handy later. And if it doesn't, then I guess get fucked. The final boss was a bizarre experience. I spent ages trying to defeat it with what I had, but nothing did the trick because after enough time, he'd go into the corner and get all his health back. It was only after trying a couple dozen times that I accidentally ran into this chicken roaming the arena, and realized that you could pick it up and use it as a sniper, which kills the boss in 4 hits. All the animals throughout the game only ever seem to be for mindless killing. I didn't know one could be used as a weapon. It's a frustrating experience playing this game, one I'm glad I never have to do again. The shitty part is though, I had to spend so much time getting through it with trial and error that I'm not good at it. And so I somewhat think back on this experience fondly. But I won't be tricked, this is trash, even if most of my hatred is contained to that first level. Again, it just does such a horrible job at first impressions. No stage gets anywhere near as bad as this one, but that doesn't make it good. Worst yet, you gotta sit through the entire game with this awful music plaguing your eardrums. Dude, it was so bizarre to look online for this game's soundtrack and realize that there's more than one song in this thing. It all sounds the goddamn same. Those were all different songs! There's also a multiplayer mode in here, and that's probably the only way I could imagine having some fun with it, even if it does require both players to understand what each of these weird-ass weapons do. But there's at least a fuck ton of characters to play as, so that's appreciated. Now, I did play the PlayStation version since it's the one I grew up with, but I have heard the Nintendo 64 version is slightly better. It doesn't look as scuffed, the cutscenes are in real time instead of blurry FMVs, but the core experience is the exact same. Your preference most likely just comes down to which you grew up playing. Apparently, the CEO of Acclaim at the time announced a sequel to it, but word was never heard on that again, presumably after seeing the dreadful review scores. I will say I can see why people have fond memories of this game. Maybe if I played it at the time of release instead of 2012, I could see myself feeling the same way. And again, it is an experience I look back on rather fondly now after having to power through the whole thing. And there is just a charm to seeing a game based off the show from such an early point in its history. Honestly, the South Park branding does a lot of the heavy lifting in making the experience somewhat bearable. And even personally, there was some catharsis in finally seeing the entirety of it, considering all most people seem to get through as the first level. But a bad game's a bad game. And this right here is a bad game. Game, sorry, fuck. And they wanted to put it on a Game Boy? That's right, if you take a look at a lot of the promotional material for the N64 release, you'll notice the Game Boy logo paired alongside it, which is weird because, you know, there was no Game Boy version. Well, as I'm sure 99.9% of you are aware and sick of hearing at this point, a Game Boy version was being worked on and fully completed before getting cancelled entirely after Matt and Trey felt it didn't fit with the system's more kiddie demographic. Fine for N64 though, apparently. Now, the game still did release, just not affiliated with the South Park brand. Not wanting their work to go to waste, and to be fair, why would they? Acclaim decided to have the game's sprites reworked, releasing it as the New Adventures of Mary Kate and Ashley in America and Maya the Bee in Europe. These could not be further from South Park. Not that the game had much associated with the show outside of its visuals. The story was said to be the exact same as the console game, although this time naturally told through sprite work, and god, they are infinitely more charming than what we got in the other version. When playing it though, I noticed that it seems as if the attempts to tie the two ports together was eventually dropped. Or it was added in, who knows. I find a prototype of it on the Internet Archive where you can just play it in the web browser, with its cutscenes following the story of the console version. However, most ROMs you download feature a different story, with Kenny simply being kidnapped a variety of times and the other boys needing to rescue him, whether he be trapped in a snow cage or microwave or orb for some reason. No idea which of these were the most recent versions, but the one featuring the kidnapped Kenny plot definitely looks more polished, so I'm inclined to believe that would have wound up being what was supposed to release. I love how this game looks. The boys have never been so expressive. The way they all look up at Chef at the start is super funny. Stan has this big goofy smile when he jumps, and crouching for some reason makes him do this. I mean, yeah. You control Stan, Kyle, and Cartman, each of them with their own unique moves. Kyle's hat works as a springboard for the others to jump on. Stan can throw Cartman to other areas, while he can swim. Each of them are still voiced by Matt and Trey with little sound bites when you die or beat a level. And to be fair, it is pretty crazy seeing words like bitch in a text box or hearing Kyle audibly say ass in a Game Boy game. Not even the back of the N64 version could get away with that.
Oh my god! They killed Kitty! You bastard!
It really is crazy that, yeah, the entire game is here. A lot of secondary characters appear, mainly coming from that first season of the show. All the cutscenes have been implemented with over 20 Kenny death sequences, a Wendy minigame, and the thing itself is genuinely fun. Nothing special, but if it had managed to release, I think it would have been considered one of the better licensed games at the time. I mean, I guess it did release as a licensed game, but I don't care how fun it is. I'm not playing a Mary Kate and Ashley game. I'm not that desperate for content. Still, though, I do understand Matt and Trey's apprehension. Not that they were right in the decision, but I do think about how many wannabe, edgy teenagers would buy this game expecting to see some raunchy, awesome shit, only to be met with this happy-looking puzzle game. I wanted farts and cuss words! This shit wants me to think? Ugh! It would have happened at least once. I mean, I kind of wish it did not. Either way, South Park for Game Boy Color, released or not, was still a very fun time. If this sort of puzzle game is your thing, I'd definitely recommend checking it out while we move on to our next game. This fucking thing. Okay, now this is a weird one. Chef's Luv Shack, releasing in 1999 for, well, pretty much everything. PlayStation, N64, fucking Dreamcast. I've always known of this game, or at least would see its name listed amongst the rest of the South Park stuff, but never really had any interest in checking it out. I don't know why, maybe it's the name Chef's Luv Shack, it just doesn't sound like a real video game now, does it? So at the same time they were busy porting the original N64 game to PlayStation 1, Acclaim put this into development. I guess after seeing the less than stellar response, they figured they couldn't get away with pumping out a bigger game in such a short amount of time. So, they had two options. 1. Give their team more time. Or 2. Make a dogshit party game. Okay, to Acclaim, there was probably only one option. I can't imagine giving them more time was even on the table. They'd laugh them out of the fucking room. Really, though, a party game doesn't sound like the worst idea out there. Again, South Park is a very wacky show which lends itself to kooky, crazy minigames, and being a very dialogue-heavy series, something like this lends itself more to that style of humor compared to a first-person shooter. I mean, what were they thinking? I've since learned that apparently Matt and Trey were really into GoldenEye at the time, and asked the team to make something like that, which now just makes so much more sense as to why that came out the way it did. Either way, South Park party game, good idea. Where's the butt? I know it's around here somewhere. There it is. See, what we ended up with is a whole lot less Mario Party, and a whole lot more boring quiz show. These kind of games were relatively popular at the time, especially with the You Don't Know Jack series, which saw yearly releases on PC and PlayStation. Yes, this is the same series that would eventually become Jackbox. I was surprised to learn that too. Could turn out good. And hey, I really like the general idea behind it. That being the entire thing is presented as an in-universe game show on South Park Public Access. Chef serves as the host of this quiz, the contestants consisting of hot supermodels, and the winner getting to spend the night with them. Although, as we'll soon hear over and over and over again, the cheerleaders had practice that day, and so all they could get were 4 boys from the elementary school. It's a fun setup. Again, I like that they bothered to try and have it make sense within the show itself. That's where a lot of my praise ends. Okay, so first things first, I like the way it looks a lot. It's funny to think the Stick of Truth was praised for finally giving us a South Park game that tries to look accurate to the show, when Chef's Luv Shack came out 15 years prior. Where is its accolades? And to be fair, it's pretty accurate. All the characters look how they should, they're animated similarly. But there's a few specific instances where they'll zoom in up close, or certain minigames that require them to be shown from an angle the cartoon had never given them a reference for yet. And yeah, in those cases it can look a tad bootleg, but they get an A for effort. This thing is also chock full of voice lines recorded specifically for the game, with Isaac Hayes coming in to host. The guy had to read out every single question they could cycle through. I read somewhere there's like 500. That must have been a fucking annoying recording session. It's also impressive that something with this many voice lines could end up on something like the N64. Although I guess when that's all there really is to your game, you better make sure it works. You can play with up to 4 people, each getting to play as one of the boys. Although oddly enough, when you're playing solo, there is no option to compete against AI, meaning no matter what, you will always win the thing. There's minigames present throughout, and you also end up playing these against nobody. Except I landed on this kart racing one that had AI racers present. Clearly they were capable of implementing them. Imagine playing Mario Party by yourself and it just doesn't let you pick anyone else to compete against and you're just circling the fucking map collecting stars. Sounds fun. Either way, Chef will ask you a question, sometimes related to the show, a lot of the time not, and you buzz in to answer. Get it right, you get points. Get it wrong, you lose them. There are bonus rounds, double or nothing segments, but really you're gonna wind up seeing everything there is to it within the first couple of rounds. I accidentally forgot to start recording until halfway through my run, and so decided to restart from the beginning again, hoping they would cycle through some different voice lines. But no. Every time you start the thing, you'll have to watch Chef and the narrator go through the exact same jokes again and again, so even if you did find them somewhat amusing the first time, they're bound to get old. These loading times, they are everywhere and last forever.
Correct, children.
Oh, yeah. Let's bring on the Wheel of Fortuitousness.
The minigames I thought would be at least somewhat interesting, but they're also basic. Spank the monkey in the correct order. Land your frog on a lily pad. Play Donkey Kong. I appreciate them being here, and again, I can imagine they'd be more engaging if I wasn't having to play against myself. But there's like less than 30 of them, and the max amount of rounds you can have in a game is it. So after 4 or 5 playthroughs, you've seen all there is on offer here. I like Kyle's little victory dance, though. Really, though, who was playing this 4 or 5 times? The questions are too hard for a kid or stupid adult. Any South Park fan would just want South Park trivia, but are now being asked what herpes is a Greek phrase for. Beats me. I just want to ask, who was bringing this out at the function? Was there anyone who had fun with their friends playing this? I don't doubt that it happened. As is, it's fine. But there isn't enough South Park uniqueness here to make up for how bland the actual quiz part is. And it ends with a fucking Movie Maker video clip!
Join us next time when we'll play Chef's Luv Shack with 4 bodacious swimsuit models.
Really? You mean it?
Sure, Chef. Sure.
I don't want to knock the game too hard, especially with the credits showing the team through little South Park OCs. Look at them. I can't get mad at these guys. And so, overall, Chef's Luv Shack is just okay. I can see the fun to be had, but you can tell this shit was cobbled together. I like the presentation, goofiness and all. Like, 2 of the minigames were kinda fun, and I think the idea of a South Park trivia show would work really well, especially now that the show has like 300 episodes instead of the 30 or so it had when this thing came out. But the rest, I can take or leave. Acclaim, please, just give me one. Give me one good game, come on, I know you have it in ya. Okay, let's go in with an open mind. Guys, I have a confession to make. I kind of like South Park Rally. That is no joke, I'm not pulling your chin. I am aware this is considered quite possibly the worst South Park game, even more so than the shooter, but kind of had fun.
So break like the wind with Comedy Central's South Park Rally, the video game. New from Acclaim.
I always saw this game as a kid on Google Images. But a South Park racing game? I knew I had to have it. I mean, just look at this cover. So badass. However, when it came down to asking for it, like I mentioned before, I wound up begging for the shooter instead, which completely turned me off all of these older releases. This one got atrocious reviews, most likely a result of the poor taste left in everyone's mods from the previous South Park outings, as well as the game itself not being very, good. Came out for PC, N64, PlayStation, and Dreamcast, with each version being pretty different. Sure, they all follow the same structure and have the same general controls, but the character roster is bigger or smaller depending on the version, the performance is obviously better on PC and Dreamcast, but by far the biggest difference would have to be the difficulty, with AI being a lot more forgiving on the N64 compared to the PS1 and PC. The game was developed, once again, in half a year, which gives you the impression it would simply be another rushed, slapdash piece of shit made solely to capitalize on the IP. And it is. But I like it. Every franchise out there had a crappy kart racer at the time. Smurfs, Muppets, Lego, Mickey Mouse. So really it made complete sense for South Park to take a stab at the genre. And it's a great idea on its own. Again, the show at this point had a vast array of memorable characters and locations. So just create a couple basic courses, add a few items, and call it a day, right? Well, instead of taking the traditional approach, the team behind South Park Rally decided to do something entirely different. Initially, I was very confused by this game, and not only because my version for some reason wouldn't play any music. But the first race in Championship mode starts by presenting you with a diet, as if it matters to you at all, and you being told the goal is to cross each checkpoint 1 to 4, 3 times over in order to win. I thought this was an odd over-explanation for what should be a simple kart racer, only to start the race and see the first checkpoint in front of me was number 4. What idiot designed this shit? What, you designed the course one way and are having me go through it backwards? And that's when I'd start driving through and realize just how big this map is. There really is no set path to go on, at least not an obvious one. I mean, just look at how huge this mini-map is, with constant turns and branching paths. There's also nothing stopping you from taking these wrong turns, and so I'd often find myself trying my best to map out the best way to do the full lap, only to realize my lap number wasn't changing, and it's because I didn't physically touch each of the checkpoints. Dude, I was ready to call it quits. I'd played this first race too many times to count, and had no interest in continuing this clearly unfinished game. And then, something clicked. I'm having such a frustrating experience right now because I'm treating this like a regular kart racer, who could blame me? But the game is giving me no restrictions, so maybe I should be taking advantage of that. And so instead of trying to do a lap around the whole thing, all I had to really do was cross each checkpoint, no matter what way I went. And so I had the freedom to do that using whatever route I wanted, and then I immediately beat it with no problem whatsoever. To all 4 of you who have played and like this game, probably sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but I've watched enough people play this game to know that moment of realization does not always happen, because then you're dropped into the next race where you're given a new objective, to complete and hold on to a trophy while passing through each checkpoint in numerical order while dodging attacks from your opponents, in which it became really obvious this isn't a racing game. It's fucking mission mode from Mario Kart DS, just like 5 years early. That's right, there aren't really any traditional 3-lap races to finish here. Instead, each gives you a different goal to accomplish compared to the previous. In one, everyone has mad cow disease and you have to hold on to the antidote for enough time to cure yourself. In the next, you're required to pick up a specific item and shoot every opponent with it. Or you have to collect chickens and drop them off at a certain point, collect Easter eggs. These aren't racetracks, they're fucking battle courses. I don't know, that's just a really cool idea to me. Surely a lot more interesting than your average Mario Kart reskin. At the very least, it makes me appreciate the effort that went behind designing all these unique challenges, each one taking place on a different day throughout the year, meaning some can be framed around holidays like Easter or Halloween. You know, it's just too bad that such a novel idea is hidden to most, buried underneath. Well, look at it. It is a very bad looking game. It can kinda get away with it on the N64 and PS1, but dude, a Dreamcast game should not be looking like this. Again, there is a certain charm to it, it almost gets away with it, but it doesn't alleviate the roughness. I mean, just look at these item boxes. This is clearly something they clearly put in the prototype and didn't have time to finalize. What the fuck are these supposed to be? Alright, I don't want to come off like I'm saying this game is some misunderstood masterpiece or anything. It's only one of those things. So I want to go over everything that sucks. And there is a lot. First of all, the controls are horrible for this sort of thing. You ever try to pick up a variety of very tiny items under a time limit with a small, awkwardly controlling vehicle? You have? Oh, you might like this then. Either way, turning is a nightmare. You have a quick drift option made for going around corners, but I don't know, I never got it to work the way I wanted. I more often than not just relied on the regular turn. It was slower and more annoying to deal with, but I find them more reliable. The items take a lot of getting used to. There are so many of them, ranging from long-range weapons to landmines to homing shots. Speed boosts. PC version has a unique weapon I can't show on screen, but trust me, there's a reason it got cut. I don't knock them for bothering to put in all this stuff, especially since all of them are fun references to the cartoon, but it does take a few good races to be able to tell and remember what each of them does. Getting hit by them is also super annoying. It has the chance to launch your car super far, and landing upside down, so now you gotta wait like 5 seconds for the game to register this and flip you back over. Stuff like that can kill a race. Also, the difficulty curve is fucking brutal. Again, it's only on certain versions, but I was playing one of those versions. And so by the time I got to this Easter egg hunt, it was a fucking nightmare. I just couldn't get to them as fast as these other guys. And when I finally did, I'd have to spend half my time trying to actually pick up the thing. Other than that, every time Kyle said sweet, I swear in my life it was just Stan's audio clip.
That's it.
1 out of 10. But this is all stuff you could tell would have been ironed out if the team were given more time. It screams of a rushed holiday release. Wait, I missed Christmas by a month? Damn, get fucked, Acclaim. Still though, for South Park fans, there's lots to enjoy. Everyone here is voiced, especially crazy considering the amount of characters on offer. Mario Kart 64 was coming out with 8 characters, while South Park Rally was sitting over here with over triple that. And as we all know, quantity over quality. Some relatively obscure characters here too. A lot of them still sit with this being their only playable appearance in the franchise, like Damien, Bebe, Jesus, Dr. Mephisto, Ike, and the other versions have more characters. The Dreamcast has 35, which includes costumes for the 4 boys and Chef. There's a lot packed in here. Now, I don't want to give off the impression that I think this game is good, not in the slightest. Its controls, presentation, and AI bring it down heavily, but despite that, I managed to have a lot of fun with the mission structure and appreciated it doing something new. This game is not devoid of enjoyment like the average review would make you think. It just takes a little bit of understanding its quirks. Unfortunately, though, 2 people did not understand those quirks were Matt Stone and Trey Parker themselves, who were so appalled at this 0 for 3 from Acclaim that they refused to allow any South Park game to be made for the foreseeable future. It's a real shame, as no matter the quality, you can tell each of these games were made by genuine fans of the show, who were excited to work on these projects. They were just consistently held back by Acclaim's desire to make money instead of good games. See, one of the advantages Matt and Trey got out of nobody thinking South Park would amount to anything was Comedy Central allowing them to keep at least some rights to the property, which means they retain full creative control. Also, they voice all the characters, so it would be hard to get a new game out the door without their involvement. And so, that was it for South Park games. At least for the time being. The show continued to air, the years went on, and Acclaim went out of business in 2004. The evil had been defeated. And so, maybe, South Park games could make a return? Nope. Although that's not to say there was never an attempt. Just over 10 years ago, on a seemingly random day, it was revealed that a South Park game had been put into some form of production during the mid-2000s. However, as you can guess by the lack of, a video transition to it, the game was cancelled. And the weirdest part? It was a Simpsons hit-and-run clone. Apparently some guy decided to buy an original Xbox development kit. These were used by studios to get an idea of the specs of a console and use it for test purposes. And on this dev kit was a very early prototype for a South Park video game that never saw the light of day. Developed by Buzz Monkey Software, known for and spearheaded by Ubisoft. All that exists of the game is a single mission, which sees Cartman needing to break into the South Park mental house, gathering an outfit identical to the one seen in the Special Olympics episode to get through the doors, in which he'd be experimented on by the workers there with electroshock therapy, which then reactivates this V-chip from the movie, presumably to be used as a special move in future levels. Being developed around Season 8 of the series, it's assumed the game would have followed its own storyline while borrowing elements from existing episodes for the sake of fan service. Again, very similar to Hit and Run. Not the exact same, of course. It definitely appears as if Hit and Run were merely the base, with the focus being less on racing, and more so on platforming, combat, and puzzle solving, average action-adventure game stuff. It would have obviously been 3D, being the first time since 1998 we get to see the time mapped out in such a way, and while the boys do have a strange look to them, never need to see these guys with actual legs ever again, I do at least like that they returned to that oddly realistic textured look of the original N64 release. It would have featured a huge open world, multiple playable characters, many multiplayer modes, and it all just sounds like way too much for this team to accomplish. The game was soon cancelled, all that exists publicly being this small vertical slice, which does show a lot of promise, but we obviously have no idea what the finished product would have looked like. Probably would have been alright, especially since it used Hit and Run as a base. I mean, it fucking uses the sounds and effects and pause menu and everything, but there's really no way of knowing how it would have ended up. We do know that Matt and Trey were at least vaguely aware it was going on in the background. Some members of the South Park crew lent their voices temporarily, but I have to imagine if you showed either of them this gameplay, they would have no idea what they were looking at. The studio were given an extremely tight deadline to get this thing out before the industry properly moved on to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, meaning they were most likely given around a year. This was also not a great time to be a game developed at Ubisoft. If they had to cancel Rayman 4, then South Park had no chance. And for a team so small, with such little support and such massive expectations, it's no wonder this crashed and burned before it ever really got off the ground. Who knows, maybe that rushed development cycle would have resulted in us getting the same thing as all the other South Park games to release by that point. Good ideas buried underneath a stressed team not able to execute it. But I do wish, either way, we could have seen what the final product would have looked like. And with this, South Park video games continued their dormancy, leaving a 9-year gap between Rally and what would end up marking the series' return to gaming. What a weird way to make your return to gaming. Something worth mentioning that I haven't really discussed yet is that despite having the franchise take a break from the gaming scene for all those years, Matt and Trey were still, as you'd call them, gamers. I mean, I've seen Trey Parker name drop Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Clearly he knows a thing or two. Maybe that's why they were so adamant about putting a stop to the South Park games. They knew the space. They knew what a good game looked and played like. You know, you go from GoldenEye to South Park and there's a slight difference in quality. It was probably very embarrassing for them to have their names attached to such low-quality efforts. You know, you think Matt Groening ever played any of those Simpsons video games? I bet the last game he played was with a fucking number pad. Another thing to happen during this dormancy was Matt and Trey making an insanely smart deal with Comedy Central to own 50% of the series' non-television rights, which means they now see an even greater share in streaming and merchandising rights. They still had some prior, but now, again, it's fucking half. And they took advantage of this. It was shortly after this deal they started streaming full episodes of the cartoon for free on their South Park Studios website. Anyone from the UK or Ireland are probably very familiar with this screen that plagued my childhood. Come on, just let me in, I'll be good. Around this time they also formed South Park Digital Studios. You know, that's how this logo came to be, which was designed to be a small group of people responsible for creating South Park projects outside the cartoon. Like, I don't know, video games, for example. With this, and in an attempt to get the bad taste left by those early entries out of everyone's mouths, the crew decided to team up with British studio Double Six and Microsoft themselves to create the Xbox Live Arcade exclusive South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play. Yep, this would mark the first time Matt and Trey had major involvement in the development of a South Park game, with South Park Studios even allowing them to use some of the artists there to help create unique assets and cutscenes. Now, when it came down to it, I do have to wonder what made them decide on a tower defense game, but if I were to make a guess, I imagine it was probably a mixture of not getting overly ambitious, like let's make a fun simple game before a crappy massive one, as well as the genre lending itself well to the cutout style of the show. You got a fixed camera angle with a top-down view, you only gotta worry about the characters walking around and attacking, and you can pull from a variety of different bad guys from the series without having to worry too much about how it'll all come together story-wise. When I got an Xbox 360, I was very new to the idea of the internet, and so when I finally got access to the marketplace and saw this, I had to have it. But as I've stated in previous videos, getting my hands on some Microsoft points wasn't the easiest, and so I'd have to settle for playing the demo again, and again, and again, trying to squeeze as much enjoyment as I could from the brief couple stages. The story sees Eric rush to gather all his friends together, as an evil is rapidly approaching South Park, with them being the only ones who can Let's Go Tower Defense play. While not fully animated, I really do enjoy the unique style of presentation all these cutscenes have. A lot of new artwork had to be created, and I appreciate the way they frame certain shots to accentuate a gag.
He says he's building a great wall around South Park to stop all these things from coming, and he wants your help. Why don't you help us, Clyde? Because I don't care.
Even some that parody the structure of the game itself.
Level 7, not completo.
Not Comprito.
There's a lot of classic characters thrown in, Randy, Man Bear Pig, even Scott Tenorman. But in the end, it's revealed that none other than the game's Japanese announcer himself has been behind all this, and now it's time to take him down. As is, it's a fairly standard tower defense game. Over the course of the story, you start to unlock more and more characters to use as you try and stop ginger kids, crab people, even Mongolians from getting too far into town. You can place down towers to automatically shoot at enemies, with there being a solid amount of variety between them. But each character also has their own stats to consider, like Stan being an all-rounder, or Cartman being slower but having a more powerful attack to make up for it. You start with incredibly small arenas to defend, but pretty quickly they start to ramp up in scope and difficulty, as it stays pretty fast-paced with you needing to constantly keep on your toes. All while the characters spout the same 5 phrases. Some of which rip direct lines from the show. I can't really tell if they've all been re-recorded or not, definitely some have. But certain characters like Pip can get super annoying with how long some of their lines are. Realistically, there's only so many ways you can fuck up a game like this. Again, I respect them for starting small and trying to see if there even were a market for future South Park games, and at the very least, it looks the part, replicating the art style of the show 1-to-1, nowhere near as bootleg as Chef's Luv Shack. Pretty lengthy too, with it taking around 5 hours to beat in an average playthrough. There was definitely no need for this to be anything other than a cheap Xbox Live game, but for what it is, it's fun. And hey, it's a landmark moment for South Park games. It got an average score that's over 50%. New record! Got okay reviews, didn't make a big splash, but the people who did play it seem to have enjoyed it. And I think it's exactly what the South Park brand needed. Proof it could work as a video game in some form or another. It's really just okay. What you see is what you get, but I think the South Park branding more than makes up for the average gameplay. Not that I can even recommend it to any of you, not legally at least. As Microsoft delisted the game in July of 2024 with the closure of the Xbox 360 marketplace, and I can't imagine they have any intention of bringing it back. It's bizarre to think this is the time we're living in. People have been talking for years about how gaming's switch to a more digital marketplace will have unfortunate ramifications in the future, and now here we are living in it. A game that's just gone forever. Not that there's no way to play it, wink wink nudge nudge, emulation, but despite how average it may be, I don't think that means it has no right to be available anywhere. But I understand there's probably a shit ton of legal stuff that comes into play that I can't even pretend to understand. Either way, experiment succeeded. We can have a decent South Park game. Hallelujah! And we saw that followed up just 3 years later with the next release, Tenorman's Revenge. So a fact I was actually unaware of until right now is that South Park had a 2-game deal with Xbox Live Arcade. And given the apparent success of Tower Defense, it was now time to follow up with the second entry, which was promoted super hard around the time of release back in 2012. They put the trailer for it on the Season 15 DVD, it was all over the Marketplace homepage, and the #1 want of a 10-year-old Mark, who had just figured out how to connect his internet to the Xbox, and whose first instinct was to look up South Park and see what came up. We got something a tad more ambitious this time, a fully fledged 2D platformer with a focus on local and online co-op. I believe this was the first game I ever bought digitally, and I fucking thought it was okay. Yeah, even as a kid, I remember being slightly disappointed. I didn't not like it or anything, but I do recall a feeling of, I wish I was more into this. Despite it being rare for me to get to download games digitally, I don't remember ever putting much time into it. I think I got to the third world and called it quits, not bothering with the rest. I tried getting some friends to play it with me, joining in on the co-op, but they quickly became equally bored. The story, oddly enough tying into the Go God Go episodes that had come out around that time, sees Scott Tenorman sneak into Eric's house and steal his Xbox hard drive, with the 4 boys having to travel throughout space and time to get it back.
Yes, yes! Suck on that, Tenorman! Dude, let's go home and play Arkham City, except for Kyle. You stay here.
For the most part, things are played out pretty straight. It's full of unique dialogue, scripted exclusively for the thing, but most of it simply comes down to the characters announcing where they have to go next, or commenting on what they're currently seeing. I definitely think Tower Defense was the funnier South Park game out of the two, even if the unique artwork created for the intro and outro is pretty charming. Graphically, though, it's 1-to-1 with the series. Again, they pull a lot from existing assets provided by South Park Studios. But this is definitely the closest they've gotten to making you feel like you're playing an episode of the cartoon. With all the exaggerated swagger of it, I'm not doing that again. Saying that, though, there was always something about this game that looked so visually boring. Maybe it's how zoomed out the camera is. Again, really optimized for 4 characters on screen at once. On your own, though, makes you feel so small. Or maybe it's the backgrounds themselves, they can be quite dull. The first level, for example, is full of grays and beiges and dark reds. The next you're in a sewer, which is a sewer. I don't know, it's not bad, but just kind of uninteresting. Same with the music. All boring action scores you'd find in a Marvel movie. Sure, the other games had music that bordered on annoying, or completely treaded on annoying in certain cases. I'd take that any day over this. The gameplay, though, I think is its biggest issue, with how unbelievably average it is. Also, please don't question why my game looks like this. Again, taken off Marketplace permanently, and so the version I played was filled with all these visual glitches that are definitely not in the actual game. Some of them got pretty egregious to look at, so for the sake of giving you guys an accurate representation of how it looks, I'm gonna switch to walkthrough footage. Believe me, I'm saving you such an eyesore. So throughout each level, aside from just reaching the goal, you can also collect time cores along the way. Get enough and you're able to progress in the story. There are also these orb things that make your timer go down, which gets you a better rank, but fuck, I didn't care about that shit. These levels are way too long. Most time cores are only able to be collected by playing as a certain character, each of them having their own unique move you gotta use to progress. There are also points where you can switch into the character's superhero persona to do another specific thing, like Cartman wall jumping or Kenny being able to die and turn into an invulnerable ghost for a brief moment. Because of all these vastly different moves, it results in some stages feeling massive, with tons of branching paths. Which is cool, definitely a lot of replay value here, but I think the way they paced it could have been better. The first world is huge. It's almost overwhelming with how many pathways there are to pick. However, when you get to World 2, it's night and day how linear it is in comparison. I feel the worlds should have gotten bigger over time instead of the opposite. Despite each level following this structure, there's sometimes the occasional shake-up. If you find a key, you can access these brief heaven segments that were neat. Some stages, like the one where you meet Mr. Hanky in the sewers, has you traveling across his poo-choo train as it's moving. And there's so many segments where Scott will come in and activate this robot, which puts you on a timer. If you don't reach and destroy the robot in time, you're sent all the way back to the beginning of the segment. Pretty annoying, but hey, I appreciated something new. These large levels with a focus on co-op also meant you're at a serious disadvantage if playing solo, as you'd have to replay each stage 4 times over at minimum to get all the time cores. However, they eventually patched it to allow single-player gamers to switch characters on the fly mid-level. Didn't realize you could do that till after I beat it. Overall, though, I think the biggest thing to bring the game down is how long the levels are. This game is like 6 hours, and I don't think it needed that when the formula has little to no evolution from start to finish. Each stage is around 10 to 15 minutes, but some of them feel like they drag on for like an hour. After 20 minutes of playtime, I was immediately reminded of why I never got past World 3 as a kid. The challenge comes from the absolute boredom felt while playing. I'm sure it's slightly more fun with friends, but I have to imagine it would mostly be the same experience, just with 3 equally bored buddies by your side. There's not enough trademark South Park humor to keep you invested. You quickly get about as sick of playing it as the 4 boys are going through this whole ordeal. But I can't blame someone for having a soft spot for it. It's not terrible or anything, and I thought I had a soft spot for it too. But then I played it. Tenorman's Revenge is one of the blandest platformers I've ever had to go through, and I do not recommend going out of your way to get it. Still though, better than the shooter. South Park, The Stick of Truth. Quite possibly my most anticipated video game of all time. I pre-ordered this shit back before the pre-order bonuses got completely changed after the game switched developers.
South Park video game, coming to stores soon.
Yeah, and if you believe that, I got a big floppy wiener to dangle in your face.
Starting at THQ, South Park The Stick of Truth had one goal, to make you feel like you're playing an episode of the cartoon. Again. It being inspired by the likes of Earthbound and Paper Mario. The Stick of Truth was initially revealed in 2012 before its future was put up in the air after the closure of THQ. Eventually, it saw new life through Ubisoft, being developed by Obsidian, but it's crazy to look back on that initial reveal trailer and see just how much of it wound up not appearing in the final game.
We need a savior who can undo that which has been did.
I'll do it.
Jews can't be saviors, remember?
The story sees you move into South Park as the new kid, you being able to create your own OC to your liking. With this, you find yourself being indoctrinated into the kingdom of Koopa Keep, ruled by Cartman, who's in constant war with the elves, ruled by Kyle, all over control of the Stick of Truth, whoever holds which being able to control their universe. The first 2/3 are completely tied to this conflict, you teaming up with Eric to gather an army that can take down the elves. Yet, interestingly, right before you arrive to this final battle, you're allowed to choose between which faction you side with. Always made me wish the game opened with you getting to choose between the two, Sonic Adventure 2 style. Although I understand the circumstances this game was developed under, that was probably not possible at all. Again, with THQ going under, Matt and Trey had assumed Stick of Truth was dead and buried, so it's incredible it released at all. Even more incredible is just how much South Park references they managed to cram into this thing. At the time of release, around 250 episodes had been released, and I want to say this game included at least a small nod to like 200 of them. There are not many I think were left out, whether it be through mechanics, items, summons, missions, photographs, even just miscellaneous shit you pick up from enemies or chests. Almost every episode is covered, creating this ultimate experience for fans. And because of this, incorporating elements from Season 1 of the show as well as 17, there's an excellent attempt to blend the art styles. You know, you take a look at how a rat is drawn in Season 1, and it looks a whole lot more simple than how it would now. However, they use this to their advantage in certain cases. For example, if you see one of these simple rats, then you know it's probably cosmetic. But a more complex one, that's a fight you gotta get through. It's small and hard to notice, but seriously smart. Anything they can't cover through these means it's tackled through your social media. Throughout the game you meet certain characters that wish to add you on Facebook, some of which only doing so after completing their side mission. And it's another avenue for the game to bring back some characters who were only ever seen once, like Romper Stomper, Al Gore, or Mr. Hanky's kids. The music has this grand, epic feel, a soundtrack so good it was later incorporated into future episodes of the show, and it complements the gameplay greatly. You're first asked to choose a class, although I don't know anyone who didn't immediately choose Jew, in which you slowly unlock super moves throughout the adventure to use at your disposal. For example, the Jew has the Sling of David, Jiu-Jitsu, the Circumscythe, and Plagues of Egypt. Not all are created equal. I find little use for the Whirling Doom and Jiu-Jitsu, but as you'll soon see, the others are more than powerful enough to take on your foes, whether they be elves, government agents, or underpants gnomes. You're free to roam around in an accurate depiction of South Park. Finally, we can see how far away each character lives from one another. And you learn a variety of special moves throughout the thing that opens things up even further. You get abducted by aliens where you're probed, which allows you to teleport through different areas on the map. Or gnome dust you can use to shrink yourself and traverse through tight crevices. Eventually, you have to get your passport and travel to Canada, which exists as a fun little recreation of early RPGs. Everything but the characters being represented through pixels. It's super charming. During each fight, you can use an extra move on top of your regular attack. Whether it be normal, strong, ranged, or farted on, although I don't think there's really any case where you shouldn't be using your special move or a strong attack. You have a buddy helping you throughout the adventure, with a good selection of iconic characters to choose from: Butters, Kenny, Jimmy, Eric, Kyle, and Stan, each having their own set of special moves you can use to take on your foes, not that you really need them. I think the game's biggest flaw is how easy it is. There's very little strategy involved. I think this came down to a fear of making the player frustrated by having to replay fights or sit through them for too long, but it has the unfortunate ramification of making everything way too easy. Not to mention short, the game only lasting around 6 hours or so, which is pretty pitiful for an RPG. It's weird, I've played Stick of Truth for the past 12 years, but when it comes down to it, I don't have much to say. I mean, yeah, it's good. It's great. But I do think a lot of that relies on you caring about the South Park brand. I had to wait until my birthday to get this, which was so painful. Even though it only came out a week after. That's right, this video is coming out on my birthday, so, you know, comment, please. But I recall going to a friend's house who I'd been talking this game up to for months, only to see that he had gotten it before me, in which he said something along the lines of, "Oh, yeah, it's kinda lame, you just walk around fighting people, it's really slow." Goes without saying this was a friend who spent most of their time playing GTA and Call of Duty. The finale is super climatic, with you getting involved in this government conspiracy to hide the alien activity in town, with a goo that turns everyone into zombies I can't show on screen for reasons that should be obvious to anyone who's played it. And the twist that Clyde, the tutorial boss, was your big bad the whole time was a great twist. I can't be the only one who was incredibly sad seeing him bring Chef back to life, only to be forced to kill him immediately. And the finale having you take on Kenny, literally killing Kenny, could not be more perfect. The, hype moments and aura, can't believe I just said that, more than make up for the simple as hell combat. A little bit of complaining there, but I don't think that should take away from the fact that this is an incredibly solid RPG. What it lacks in difficulty, it more than makes up for in variety and comedy. Its short length really is its strength in that case, never getting the chance to be monotonous. It's constantly going a mile a minute, introducing new element after new element. Dude, it's crazy looking back at those old Comic-Con interviews, Matt and Trey listing all this insane shit you'd be doing in the game, with the audience thinking it's nothing more than a joke.
Will we be able to play the douchey little new kid as a girl?
As long as you do the abortion clinic level, you can get the
You just had to be there. No matter how easy, Stick of Truth is and will always be an incredible game that completely satisfied my expectations as a South Park fan, and clearly others agreed, it receiving stellar reviews, receiving a plethora of awards, and proving once and for all that Matt and Trey knew their shit when it came to video games. Stick of Truth selling around 5 million copies, and with that, there was only one thing to do. It was time for the epic sequel, South Park Pinball. This is DLC for a virtual pinball game you can get on Steam, alongside other iconic franchises like Garfield and Goat Simulator. I'm not the biggest pinball guy out there, but I can appreciate how much effort went into this board. All the animated characters, the clips from the show. Played for a bit. Got 72 million points. Is that good? There's a Butters board that I think is slightly worse because of how barren it feels. And yeah, it's pinball. It's cool. 3 years after the Stick of Truth proved the series could release a quality title, the Fractured But Whole came out with one goal: to make a game that's bigger, better, and fixes every issue lobbied towards the Stick of Truth.
That was barely even an RPG, Kyle. The combat sucked. We're going to do it bigger, and we will settle for nothing less than a 9.5 on GameSpot.
Still not bad. This was after a shit ton of delays. I remember being so antsy waiting for the release of this thing, only made more severe once it was pushed back from December of 2016 to October of 2017. That felt like so long. Now this game is 9 years old. Wow. I think most of that anticipation came down to me not really being confident I would enjoy it as much. I was happy to see it focus on the boys' superhero personas, love the precedent it set that each new RPG would focus on a different genre. This was the last one, and there was nothing necessarily turning me off, but I wasn't really sure how I felt towards the major change to the combat system. Instead of a Paper Mario-style turn-based kind of thing, it was now trying to combine that with a strategy game, you and your enemies being free to roam this grid during a fight, which you can then use to enact different types of attacks on your enemies. I had never played a game like that before, and so I was worried this more advanced system would turn me away, especially after loving the combat and Stick of Truth, the easiness aside. I think another factor that contributed to my worries was the game not being developed by Obsidian this time around, instead being tackled by Ubisoft San Francisco. No reason to not trust them, but I don't know, 15-year-old me assumed that there might be something lost in translation between the two. I eventually got it though, bought the collector's edition and everything. I even made a review on this very channel 9 years ago. Let's see what I thought then.
Should you get South Park The Fractured But Whole? Yeah, I think it's a really good game, especially if you enjoyed the first one.
Okay, great. He did this segment for me, basically. You know, thanks, past self. The superhero stuff just kind of takes over out of nowhere, as it's the very next day after Stick of Truth. Everyone is still fighting in their Dungeons and Dragons outfits, you now being King Douchebag. When Cartman comes in, he's traveled from the future and needs your help. There's a missing cat in South Park, with the reward money of $100 being just what he and his friends need to start their superhero franchise, before their opposing team, the Freedom Pals, get there first. I'm so sorry, I've gotten demonetized so many times for saying the name of Cartman's superhero persona. I'm not risking it this time. With that, you're given your own superhero identity, and told to roam around the town to gain Instagram followers and find out what happened to Scrambles. I appreciate them trying to tie it into the Stick of Truth. It's an especially funny explanation as to why you can end as king in one game and yet you're back to being the bitch boy for Eric in this one. But I do find it odd they bothered making a tie-in episode in the cartoon that worked as a prequel to the events of this one. Although the only part that carries over is the ending, where we see the fight that caused this fracture between the group. This scene is in the game, but only if you wait around on the loading screen for long enough. While setting up the recording footage, it played for me, and I was so shocked. I had no idea this was here. It's a much bigger game with a lot more going on, so it's weird that the story this time around feels so much smaller compared to Stick of Truth. For a majority of it, things are self-contained to this rivalry with the Freedom Pals, which isn't bad, mind you, but the Stick of Truth just did such an excellent job at starting so small in scope before throwing you into the midst of this massive government conspiracy that perfectly intertwines at the end that it's kind of hard to top. It has its own benefits. A lot of the cutscenes here even more so feel like you're just able to step back and watch an episode of the show for a bit, but because of the mystery angle who's causing this uptick in crime in South Park, you feel like you spend most of the game left in the dark, being told where to go instead of it feeling natural. A lot of the time you're left to wander around for a bit before a FaceTime call comes in telling you where to go next. Like you have no agency with what's happening. At least not until the last third. I know I'm complaining slightly, but that's not to say there's nothing I like about it. I really enjoyed them trying to expand the stuff with your parents, you getting a glimpse of their dysfunctional marriage as they try to hide some big secret from you, the scenes where your character comes home, watches them fight, and then somberly sits alone eating dinner genuinely gets you to feel for what's the definition of a blank slate. And for the most part, everything done with your OC feels like a huge expansion of what Stick of Truth had to offer. You can fill out a character sheet deciding on your gender, sexual orientation, weakness, race. They have minimal impact on the game aside from certain bits of dialogue, but it definitely makes you feel more involved.
Choose difficulty.
Don't worry, this doesn't affect combat, just every other aspect of your whole life.
Wait, what the fuck?
Despite the self-contained plot for the most part, the final third I think is where this game really shines. You know, like halfway through, that Cartman is the one behind all this crime, him wanting to ensure there's always a threat for the, him and friends, in turn expanding their franchise, but I was not expecting the reintroduction of Mitch Connor on my first playthrough. Him using this as a ploy to get elected as mayor of South Park, make everyday Christmas, which therefore increases crime in the town. They embrace how convoluted this all sounds by the end, and do a good job at almost convincing you Eric has no control over this guy, and Kyle seemingly doing the same thing just to admit he was fucking with Eric was a fun twist. Because the first game wrung the franchise dry with references, I appreciate this one not trying to double dip too much. For the most part, if Fractured But Whole is going to reference an episode, it's going to pull from one not explored much in the first game. Whether it be Cousin Kyle, the cop's bias towards black people, or Jared from Subway, it does a good job at making things feel fresh and new, the town even being changed a bit between entries to feature new locales, many of which were introduced to the show in the time between the two games, like Soda Sopa or Shatipa Town, or going to Dr. Mephisto's lab, which hadn't been seen since like episode 200, I think. Graphically, we've also seen a bit of an update. There's much more detail put into things. A lot more use of gradients, lighting effects when walking through certain areas, and overall everything just feels a lot bigger. Which unfortunately has some ramifications on gameplay, as it feels like it takes longer to get around town, especially with the removal of the run button. Your character just automatically has the running speed of Stick of Truth, but with the town feeling bigger now, it's like you need another run button to go even faster than that. I think I prefer the more simplistic approach to Stick of Truth, but objectively speaking, Fractured But Whole is the graphically better game, even if it is more prone to glitches like characters speaking without the audio actually playing, or this boss fight towards the end of the game where using my summon softlocked me, having to go back and restart the entire thing. Points immediately taken off for forcing me to connect to Uplay though. You don't understand how many games of Uno and Monopoly this shit is fucked up. And at certain points, it just becomes a visual nightmare when I'm getting in-game achievements, Steam achievements, and U-Club achievements all layered over each other. It's so annoying. Music is your average action score for the most part, but I do appreciate the greater variety. In the strip club, we have more dubstep stuff, while fighting the Raisins Girls, there's this Powerpuff Girls-ass theme. And when we eventually go back to the Stick of Truth stuff, they replay a lot of the themes from that game. It was really cool. Does a good job at demonstrating how different this release is. If there's one thing I can say, it's that this game is certainly a lot less timeless compared to Stick of Truth. That game can be played whenever, and for the most part does not feel dated, whereas this game was not given that same consideration. This has already aged like milk. We got Pokemon Go moves, characters talking about Tumblr and hashtags, but there's a reference to Sonic Adventure 2, so it gets a pass.
There's no time to play games. You won't even get the chance. I'll make you see those words.
The gameplay, however, is where we've seen the greatest shake-up, now taking place within this grid that you're free to roam and strategize in. You can now have up to 4 characters present throughout, with the roster being almost double compared to last time. We got Human Kite, Toolshed, Mysterion, Professor Chaos, Call Girl, Captain Diabetes, Fast Pass, Wonder Tweak, Super Craig, Tupperware, and the Raccoon. Each have their own sets of moves, including a special one, which covers a certain area of the map. Some do damage, some cause effects, and some heal your teammates, with it being up to you to place them in the most efficient positions to take on your foes, whether it be cops, first creators, or rival fights against brainwashed allies. There's such a great variety present here. Some fights have special requirements to get through, mainly in the form of a plethora of boss fights, like purposefully getting a burning effect to light wheat that gets entirely high to stop the fight, or feeding white people to the... Gonna stop there. You start only being able to choose between 3 classes, but over the course of the game you eventually are opened up to all 12, you being able to mix and match your favorite moves to find a winning formula. There's a lot of neat stuff going on. The hazards in hub worlds have been greatly lessened, but during the fights there's a lot of stuff you can do for extra damage, such as knocking your foe into another character for extra damage, or even environmental hazards. I wasn't too sold on it at first, but this new system offers a much greater level of variety. Fights actually last longer than a minute this time around. Some can go on for as long as 20, meaning there's actual stakes at place. You making sure you don't have to go through all this gameplay again. You can help your odds by taking advantage of the crafting system. You can find certain ingredients throughout the map that allow you to make health and revive items. I definitely find myself a lot more short on them this time around, which actually forced me to engage with this system. And the artifact stuff was also really cool, even if I was just placing whatever one told me I'd get more might from. There's been a significant improvement to item collection in the form of skipping the whole take-all option from Stick of Truth. This time when you open a chest, you automatically get everything in it, lessening the attention put on references, which helps speed things up. Although, I guess to balance it out, they had to integrate this genuinely awful buddy system. At certain points, you can call upon Toolshed, Human Kite, Captain Diabetes, or Professor Chaos to help you maneuver across the environment. Which is a fun novelty the first 1 or 2 times, but quickly gets old with just how long it takes to identify their mark, walk over, summon them, perform their move, and then watch them leave. It's only like 20 seconds each time, but when they put like fucking 4 of them in a row, it gets old. Especially by the late game. They ask you to call upon them way too frequently. It's not fun or challenging, just an unnecessary roadblock that really brings the game down. Stuff like this really adds to its length. An average playthrough of the game being around 16 hours, just about triple of the Stick of Truth. And while that one felt underbaked in some areas, I can't help but feel this one overstays its welcome a little too long. By the late game, shortly after you learn of your amazing powers to earn social media followers, and you're forced to kill one of your parents, you're left feeling as if this shit is being stretched out as much as possible, like they had too many ideas. You accidentally time travel into the future and have to fight the Christmas critters, then travel too far back and have to fight yourself from the end of the Stick of Truth. Then, go back to the present and finally take on Mitch Connor, who spends half the final boss switching between Cartman and Kyle, you not knowing who the real one is. None of it's bad by any means, but definitely could have been paced a bit better. The last hour of this game feels like a constant gauntlet. me it all the more unrewarding when it just unceremoniously ends, especially given how epic the finale to Stick of Truth was.
Everything was thought up by this asshole!
Come on, everybody. Let's go get clean drugs and alcohol from the next town over.
Really, though, that's not to take away from the sheer amount of improvements made here. The world feels bigger, the combat's more interesting, more difficult. You actually feel a threat of dying, which is more than I can say about Stick of Truth. I don't want any of my complaints to make it seem like I'm shitting on the game too hard. I still love it and think it's fantastic, but when they're so similar, it's more so just a case of preference. I honestly can't tell which I enjoy more. Overall, I prefer Stick of Truth's presentation and story with the simplicity and timelessness, but I prefer Fractured But Whole's gameplay style and difficulty. I think a mix of the two could have resulted in the perfect South Park game, but like I said, once you reference something from the show, it's kinda hard to do it again without feeling as if you're dipping in on the same gag twice. Still though, both games are amazing. Just for different reasons. Stick of Truth got away with its simplistic gameplay and lack of difficulty due to the aesthetics and jokes. It could get away with an easy boss fight or a basic puzzle, because more often than not, it was making you laugh while you went through it. The second they try to add more player agency, it results in more time spent in battles hearing the same phrases over and over again. More downtime between major story beats, with certain fights lasting like 20 minutes. And if they get to the end and die, it leads to more frustration, more annoyance after realizing that they now have to listen to the same jokes and in-game interruptions repeated. Don't get me wrong, I prefer a game that gives me a challenge, but I really do believe that Fractured But Whole wind up splitting the audience a bit. Those who wanted to play a South Park game, and those who wanted to play an interactive episode. It really was crazy playing these back-to-back to see just how different they are. They were always so similar in my mind. But the main difference that I think has folks looking back on Stick of Truth more fondly comes down to one thing, and it's that it had novelty. It was the first one, had the entire franchise at its fingertips, and so I imagine it was hard for some to see Fractured But Whole as anything more than leftovers. Still, really good leftovers, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic, but I can see why some didn't prefer it. But that's not the only South Park game that came out that year, as we also saw the release of... Here's a weird one, South Park Phone Destroyer. For phones. It's a phone game. Matt and Trey were always very vocal about their disdain for freemium gaming, making a whole episode mocking the concept after being offered to jump on the train with other animated series like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and SpongeBob. And while declining that, they did allow this to be put into development. I mean, at least they're self-aware, the intro being changed to say, in-app purchases cost real money and are charged to your account, and for those reasons this game should not be played by anyone. So, this time we got an online real-time strategy game where the gimmick was everything. Instead of restricting itself to Dungeons and Dragons or superheroes, Phone Destroyer pooled a much larger roster of South Park characters, creating multiple variants for each in different genres. Whether it be cowboys, Native Americans, pirates, aliens, there's a ton. With the whole story being presented as you, the new kid again, being a master of his phone, you frequently getting FaceTime calls from Cartman and the other characters. Which is a fun way to make use out of this being exclusive to mobile devices, him attempting to use your powers of never getting off your phone. I remember playing it for a bit when it came out, and by a bit, I mean like 20 minutes, just was not for me. I'm not the biggest on these types of games, but I know a lot of people were. This thing was supported with new cards being added until 2022, 5 years in a bad lifespan. If I were to guess, the game had a small but dedicated fan base, with Ubisoft not thinking it was a venture worth continuing. And that's okay. It came out, it was fun, people liked it, and then it died. There could have been a way worse outcome from a South Park mobile game. Other than the amazing artwork created for each card, the only real thing worth mentioning about this game is that it did have a story, with you getting a different ending depending on how much real-world money you spent on the thing.
Let's see what your contribution to our game has been. Huh, okay, I guess that's what the new kid thought this game was worth.
For what it was, Phone Destroyer was a fun time waster for a lot of people. Surely a whole lot more enjoyable than... I can't believe this game is already 2 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday, the announcement that Matt and Trey were starting work on a brand new South Park game, and this time, it was gonna be 3D. Wait a second. I thought the whole selling point of the other ones was that playing in a 3D recreation of South Park was stupid. I've already made a 40-minute review of this game and why it sucks so hard, so I'll keep it brief. This was a cash grab. I don't think Matt and Trey had any ill intent towards the development of this game and its money-hungry concept, but I definitely think they were swindled by a snake oil salesman in how it would turn out. The concept was simple: create a basic 4-hour roguelike campaign that left the player wanting more, then sell them future content through paid DLC. It's almost like the freemium concept they spent a whole episode making fun of. Matt and Trey undoubtedly find the concept intriguing, them mentioning the possibilities of capitalizing on the show's quick turnaround rate by integrating elements from future episodes into the game through updates. But that only makes me question the decision more to make it 3D. You know, if it were 2D, then you could literally reuse the asset without having to model it. What? Not that it matters, the game is dead. I feel so bad for everyone who bought the season pass hoping for more than 3 fucking updates throughout the year before it died for good because nobody bought the thing. Like me, I feel bad for me. There were just a lot of questionable decisions that held it back. Why are we doing the Dungeons and Dragons shit again? Why not have every game be its own thing? The idea of a snow day is cool before realizing it really restricts the game visually. Why would I care about cosmetics when the game only has 4 fucking levels? By the time any of them will come out, I'd have already beaten the thing. This was a cheaply put together game in the hopes of tricking fans to give THQ their money. Wait a second, THQ? You've infiltrated South Park now too? It is just such an uninteresting game. One you know Matt and Trey had no confidence in. They look utterly bored in every interview. And the fact this was around the time they were already knee-deep in Casa Bonita, I imagine Snow Day was nothing more than an obligation. I like the story, bringing back Mr. Hanky after he was exiled from the show seasons prior. And if it had more levels and weapons, I think it could have been a fun little distraction, especially with it not costing as much as a AAA game. I think it was like $30 at release. But the idea was just flawed from the start. At a time where every video game now is asking you to spend an additional $20 for a season pass, there was no chance a fucking South Park game could compete in that market. It's a shame this will most likely be the last South Park game, at least for the foreseeable future. It was a massive bomb, undoubtedly costing the team a ton of money. This thing was meant to last years, yet it felt like it barely lived a day. I want to say I'm hopeful that we'll see a new South Park game in the near future, but right now at least, it seems like Matt and Trey's attention is elsewhere. Trying to get their new movie out that we still know next to nothing about aside from the fact that it's had to go through severe reshoots, which is never a good sign. The show is still chugging along, putting out their whopping 6 episodes a year, and realistically, they're getting older. They're both in their mid-50s now, not elderly, mind you, but the time it takes to put a video game together, including the mental and physical energy it demands, is so insurmountable. The concept for Stick of Truth was started in 2009, and it didn't release until 2014, another 3 years for its sequel. If Matt and Trey wanted to put out another South Park game that matched the quality of those, they're probably going to be looking at another 3 to 5 year development cycle. And maybe they just don't want to do it, which is fair. The only other option would be to minimize their involvement. And as we've seen, whether it be 1998 or 2024, that always seems to end in red. With a big 1 in the middle of it posted to IGN.com. I think despite all that though, the fact that South Park of all things managed to release 2 games of this quality is something to be praised. I mean, these weren't just good South Park games, they were good, full stop. And even those early few entries had their charm that somewhat disguised the poor gameplay. Again, I kinda like Rally and have a soft spot for that FPS. If I were to rank the game excluding the ones that didn't come out, and I'm also not including the Pinball one because it's fucking Pinball, from worst to best it would probably go Chef's Luv Shack, Snow Day, South Park PlayStation 1, Phone Destroyer, Tenorman's Revenge, Let's Go Tower Defense Play, South Park Rally, I have a real soft spot for that game, The Fractured Butthole, and finally the Stick of Truth. If you ask me a year from now, I might switch those around, but for now, that's what I'm sticking with. Whether or not you like Fractured Butthole or Stick of Truth better, I think we can all agree they're 2 of, if not the 2, best video games based on a TV show to ever release. Not that the competition is high, what did they have to compete with? Insert any other licensed game here.